You wake up, you do everything you're supposed to do, and yet you feel like you're failing at something that no one can explain. It's not about doing more. You already do. You work, deliver, solve problems, move forward. You check all the boxes, you follow the script. And yet deep down, there is a persistent feeling that none of it really matters. As if you were pushing something heavy up a mountain every day, only to see it all collapse and have to start over the next morning. It was Tuesday when he realized it. There was no crisis, no dramatic event. He was sitting at the coffee table watching the steam rise from his cup. He had slept well. He was on schedule with his projects. His bills were paid. His appointments were in order. Everything was working as it should. And that's when the feeling came. Silent, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. He finished his coffee, grabbed his keys, locked the door. On the way, he passed the same streets, saw the same people rushing by, heard the same sound of horns and quick footsteps. He arrived at work. He said hello. He sat down. He turned on his computer. He started working. And at some point, between one task and another, that question he couldn't answer came to him. What for? It wasn't discouragement. It wasn't fatigue. It was something stranger. As if everything was happening, but he wasn't really there. As if he were following an invisible script, responding to expectations he never chose, following steps that someone had defined before he was born. And the most disturbing part, no one around him seemed to notice. Or maybe everyone noticed, but they had learned not to talk about it. There is something deeply unsettling about this feeling. Because it's not about being unhappy. It's not depression. It's not a lack of purpose in the motivational sense of the word. It's more subtle, more structural. It's the realization that you can do everything right. You can follow all the rules, meet all expectations, achieve everything you've been told matters, and still feel like you're living a life that isn't quite your own. As if you were a very competent actor playing a role you never auditioned for. And worst of all, when you try to name it, when you try to explain it to someone, the words sound empty. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I feel like I'm just passing the time. It seems like nothing I do really matters. And then comes the standard response. Everyone feels that way sometimes. You just need to find your purpose. You just need to reconnect with your values. You just need to... But what if the problem isn't you? What if it's not a lack of purpose, a lack of effort, a lack of clarity? What if there's something deeper going on? Something no one has taught you to see, but which is operating silently in every routine you follow, in every expectation you carry, every time you feel that incomprehensible emptiness, even when everything seems to be working. Almost a century ago, a man looked at this discomfort and didn't try to solve it. He didn't offer a 5-step plan. He didn't promise a motivational transformation. He did something much more unsettling. He said that this discomfort is real, that you're not crazy, that this feeling of uselessness, of meaningless repetition, of effort that leads nowhere, that's not your fault. It is the human condition laid bare. And that maybe, just maybe, freedom isn't about finding meaning where none exists, but in accepting the absurd and still carrying on. That man was Albert Camus. And the story he told to explain this is that of a Greek convict named Sisyphus, who pushes a boulder up a mountain forever. But there is something in this story that few people notice. Something that can completely change the way you understand your own life. Because maybe you don't need a greater purpose. Maybe you need to stop looking for one. Albert Camus was not an ivory tower philosopher. He was not one of those who hide behind impenetrable jargon, constructing theories about life without ever having truly lived it. He was born in the dust and suffocating heat of colonial Algeria in 1913, the son of a laborer who died in World War I before he was a year old. He grew up with an illiterate, practically deaf mother who cleaned houses to support the family. There were no books at home. There were no philosophical conversations at the dinner table. There was only the stark reality, the relentless sun, poverty, the heavy silence of those who do not have the luxury of questioning existence because they are too busy trying to survive it. And it was precisely this experience, this absence of intellectual privileges, this direct contact with the harshness of reality, that shaped his philosophy. Camus did not theorize about human suffering from a comfortable armchair. He knew it from the inside. He had experienced firsthand what it means to be thrown into the world without an instruction manual, without a grand narrative to explain why things are the way they are. As a teenager, he dreamed of being a soccer player. He was good, he had talent, but tuberculosis destroyed that dream, forcing him to find another field to play in. And he found it. In literature, in philosophy, in the attempt to name what everyone feels but few can articulate. What Camus realized very early on was something that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. The universe is profoundly indifferent to our existence. You can pray, you can scream, You can build empires, you can sacrifice yourself, you can follow all the rules, and the universe will remain exactly the same. It does not respond to you. It does not validate you. It does not punish or reward you according to some hidden moral code. It simply is, and you simply are in it, without explanation, without justification, without predetermined purpose. And this mismatch between the human desire for meaning and the absolute silence of the world is what he called absurdity. It's not a pretty word. It's not comforting, but it's devastatingly accurate. Absurdity is not a complex theory that requires years of study to understand. It's an experience. It's that moment when you stop in the middle of the day and ask yourself, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Where is all this going? And you can't find an answer that really satisfies you. That's when you realize you're living on autopilot, fulfilling expectations you don't even remember choosing, following a script that seems to have been written by someone else. Many confuse this with depression, but it's not. Depression paralyzes you, drags you down, makes you believe that nothing has value. Absurdity, on the contrary, wakes you up. It forces you to face reality without the comfortable filters we normally use to soften it. It's not sadness. It's lucidity beginning to bother you. It's the feeling of seeing something that has always been there, but that you had never really noticed. Like when you repeat a word many times in a row and it loses its meaning, becoming just sound. That's it. Your whole life can start to feel like this. Meaningless gestures, actions without real consequences, days that accumulate without forming a coherent narrative. And the first reaction when this realization hits is to try to eliminate it, to seek a quick answer. I need to find my purpose. I need to reconnect with my values. I need to figure out what really matters. But Camus looks you in the eye and says something no one wants to hear. What if there is no greater purpose waiting to be discovered? What if this frantic search for meaning is precisely what keeps you trapped? What if freedom lies not in finding the right answer, but in stopping believing that there is one? That sounds nihilistic. It sounds desperate. But here's the twist that few people notice. For Camus, accepting the absurd does not mean giving up on life. It means exactly the opposite. It means stopping living for something, some distant goal, some future reward, some moment of enlightenment that will finally justify all your efforts, and starting to live despite everything, despite the lack of meaning, despite the indifference of the universe, despite knowing that everything will end and that nothing you do will alter the fundamental structure of reality. It's a subtle difference, but it changes everything. Because when you live for something, you are constantly postponing your existence. I'll be happy when I get that promotion. I'll feel fulfilled when I achieve that goal. I'll finally rest when. And that when never comes. Or when it does come, it doesn't deliver what it promised. And then you create a new when, and another, and your whole life becomes a perpetual wait for a moment that never really materializes. But when you live despite, when you accept that there is no destination, that there is no cosmic reward waiting for you, that there is no hidden meaning to be discovered, something extraordinary happens. You stop looking for external justifications for your existence. You stop needing every action to have a grand purpose. You simply live, and there is a brutal freedom in that. A freedom that is frightening because it is absolute. Camus called this revolt, but it is not violent, destructive revolt. It is not stamping your feet and shouting at the universe. It is something more subtle, more profound. It is looking at the absurd, at the lack of meaning, at the inevitable repetition, at the indifference of the world, and consciously deciding to continue. Not because you expect things to get better, not because you believe there is a greater plan, but simply because you can, because you are alive. And as long as you are alive, you can choose how to inhabit that life. This is not a philosophy that promises easy happiness. It is not a self-help manual that tells you to visualize your dreams and the universe will conspire in your favor. It's the opposite of that. It's the radical acceptance that the universe doesn't give a damn about you. And that precisely because of that, precisely because there's no one writing the script of your life, you have complete freedom to write it yourself. But freedom is scary because it comes with responsibility. And responsibility hurts. So most people run away. They construct comforting narratives. They cling to promises of transcendental meaning. And Camus understands that. He doesn't judge. But he doesn't lie either. He knows that these escapes come at a price, and that eventually, at some point in life, the absurd will knock on your door again, and you will have to choose once again between facing it or continuing to run. When absurdity reveals itself, when you finally realize that there is no cosmic meaning underpinning your existence, three paths open up before you. Camus mapped them out with surgical precision, not as abstract theory, but as real options that we all at some point consider, some consciously, others without realizing it. The first path is escape. And escape here does not mean just cheap escapism. We are not talking only about superficial distractions, spending hours scrolling through your phone feed or numbing yourself with empty entertainment. That too, of course. But Camus is talking about something much more sophisticated, much more seductive. He's talking about the grand narratives that promise to restore the meaning that absurdity has destroyed, religions that guarantee a divine plan, political ideologies that promise a glorious future, philosophical systems that construct totalizing explanations for existence. All of these are forms of escape, not because they are necessarily false, that's another discussion, but because they function as existential crutches, like canes that allow you to keep walking without having to face the naked truth. There is no solid ground beneath your feet. Escape is comfortable. It is comforting to believe that there is a God watching over you, that there is a hidden meaning in your suffering, that everything happens for a reason. It is comforting to believe that history has a direction, that progress is inevitable, that your efforts are contributing to something greater than yourself. These narratives work. They calm the anguish. They give you something to hold on to when absurdity threatens to engulf you. But Camus does not accept this comfort. For him, these narratives are leaps of faith, moments when you choose to believe in something not because there is sufficient evidence, but because you need to believe. Because the alternative, living without an existential safety net, is too terrifying. And he respects that choice. But he also recognizes it for what it is, a surrender, a way of saying, I can't live without meaning, so I'm going to invent one, even though deep down I know I'm deceiving myself. And here's the problem. When you build your life on a belief that you yourself know deep down is a protection against the absurd, you're not really living. You are merely managing your anguish. You are negotiating with emptiness. And at some point, perhaps in a crisis, perhaps in a moment of absolute loneliness, the structure will crack and you will feel the absurdity again, because it never went away. You just stopped looking at it. The second path is death, and here Camus is unapologetic. He tackles the most taboo question in philosophy with brutal honesty. If life has no meaning, why continue living? For him, this is the only truly serious philosophical question. All others, ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, presuppose that life is worth living. But is it? What is the logical justification for continuing to exist in a universe that doesn't care about your existence? Many philosophers avoid this question. They treat it as taboo, as forbidden territory. Camus does not. He looks at it head-on. And his answer does not come from a moral imperative. Life is sacred, or a promise for the future. Things will get better. It comes from something much simpler. Choice. If absurdity is the fundamental condition of existence, then death solves nothing. Because death is not an answer to absurdity. It is merely an interruption of it. It is saying, I can't deal with this and pressing the off button. But that is not facing the problem. It is running away from it in the most definitive way possible. And there is something deeply defeatist about that. Because by choosing death, you are letting absurdity win. You are agreeing with the premise that if life has no transcendental meaning, then it is not worth living. But Camus rejects this logic. For him, the absence of meaning does not make life worthless. On the contrary, it is precisely because there is no imposed purpose that you have complete freedom to create your own value. Death would be, in this context, a waste, a premature surrender before even exploring what is possible with this absurd freedom. He does not romanticize suffering. He does not say that pain has a hidden purpose or that everything will make sense in the end. But he also does not accept that the absence of meaning is reason enough to give up, because giving up is admitting that you need meaning to live. And maybe, just maybe, you don't. The third path is rebellion. And here is the way out that Camus offers. But make no mistake, it's not an easy way out. It's not a solution that makes you comfortable. It is in fact the most difficult option of the three, because it requires you to continue living without any of the crutches that make life bearable for most people, without the promise of heaven, without the guarantee that your efforts will be rewarded, without the illusion that there is a hidden meaning in your pain. Rebellion is the conscious decision to look at the absurdity and say, I know you exist. I know there is no answer. I know that all of this is, in the end, meaningless. And yet I choose to continue. Not because I expect things to change, but because continuing is in itself an act of defiance. It is not optimism. It is not hope. It is something more raw, more honest. It is the courage to exist without justification, to live not despite the absurdity, as if it were an obstacle to be overcome, but with it, accepting it as a constituent part of the human experience, as the permanent backdrop against which everything happens. And this acceptance does not paralyze. On the contrary, it liberates. Because when you stop searching for a meaning that does not exist, you stop putting your life on hold. When you stop waiting for some future event to finally justify your existence, You begin to truly inhabit the present, not because the present is perfect, but because it is all you have. And maybe that is enough. But here's the question no one can escape. If these are the three paths, escape, death, revolt, which one are you choosing right now at this very moment in your life? Because you are choosing, even if you don't realize it, even if you've never named that choice. Every day you are choosing one of these paths. And if you are escaping, if you are clinging to narratives that deep down no longer convince you just because the alternative is too scary, then there is something you need to know. Something that Camus saw, that he lived, that he transformed into the most powerful image of his entire philosophy. The image of a man condemned to push a rock up a mountain, forever, with no hope that this will change. And yet he finds a way to triumph. There is an ancient story told by the Greeks for millennia about a man who defied the gods. His name was Sisyphus, and his punishment was ingenious in its cruelty. He was condemned to push a huge boulder up a mountain, to the top. But every time he was about to reach the summit, the boulder would slip from his hands and roll down the mountain, and he had to climb down, pick up the boulder again, and start over, infinitely, without pause, without hope that it would ever change, forever and ever. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was the ultimate symbol of divine punishment, the perfect punishment for a mortal who had the audacity to cheat death, to cheat the gods, to think he could circumvent the fundamental rules of existence. And the punishment chosen was not extreme physical torture. It was something much more psychologically devastating, eternal effort without reward, the endless repetition of a task that is never completed, work that leads nowhere. And when you hear this story for the first time, the natural reaction is horror, because that's exactly what it seems to be, horror, the worst possible nightmare. Being stuck in an endless cycle, condemned to do the same thing over and over again, knowing that it will never end, that it will never work, that all your effort will always be in vain. It is the kind of punishment that only makes sense as divine punishment. No human being would choose this voluntarily. But then Camus looks at this story and asks a question that changes everything. What if we are all Sisyphus? Not as a poetic metaphor, not as dramatic exaggeration, but as an accurate diagnosis of the modern human condition. Because when you really stop to observe your life, not the edited version you tell others, but the raw daily uninterrupted experience, what do you see? You wake up, you go to work, you solve problems, you meet deadlines, you pay bills, you respond to messages, you deal with expectations, you manage relationships, you fight fatigue, and at the end of the day you sleep, and the next day you wake up again, and it all starts over. The same challenges or slightly different versions of them, the same frustrations, the same small victories that don't fundamentally change anything. And it goes on, day after day, week after week, year after year. The stone never stops rolling down the mountain. And the scariest thing, you don't realize it right away. In the early years of adulthood, there is a sense of progression. You are building something. You are moving forward. First job, first achievement, first responsibilities. It seems like there's a destiny being fulfilled, a script being followed, a destination approaching. But then there comes a moment, different for each person, but inevitable for all, when you realize there is no destination, that the script doesn't have a glorious third act, that the feeling of progress was just an illusion created by novelty. And then comes the question that paralyzes you in the middle of the day. Is this it? It's not ingratitude. It's not a lack of ambition. It's the brutal realization that maybe life is exactly what you're seeing. A succession of days, of efforts, of small battles that need to be fought over and over again because they are never definitively resolved. The work never ends. Problems never cease. Desires are never fully satisfied. There is always one more stone to push. There is always one more mountain to climb. And when you finally reach the top of one, you discover that there is another waiting for you. This should be despairing. And for many it is. It's the feeling that leads successful people with enviable careers and seemingly organized lives to have profound existential crises. Because success didn't solve anything. Achievement didn't bring the promised peace. The goal achieved turned out to be just another step on an endless staircase. And the question that no one wants to ask, but that eventually imposes itself is, why keep climbing? The modern trap is precisely this. We have been taught to live for points of arrival. When I graduate, it will be worth it. When I get that job, I will feel fulfilled. When I have financial stability, I will finally be able to relax. When I find the right person, I will be happy. And you pursue these milestones. You work yourself to death to achieve them. And when you finally get there, there is a brief moment of satisfaction. Maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks. And then reality reasserts itself. You are still you. The world is still the world. And there is a new mountain in front of you. And this is where most people do one of two things. Either they create a new goal, more ambitious, more distant, more promising, in the hope that this one will bring definitive satisfaction. Or they begin to feel a growing emptiness, a sense of futility that no external achievement seems to be able to fill. Both options are ways of not facing the fundamental truth. There is no destination. There never was. The very search for one is part of the problem. Because what are you waiting for? That at some point in your life you will wake up and feel that you have finally arrived. That you will look back and see a coherent narrative, a complete arc, a story with a beginning, middle, and satisfying ending. That you will have that feeling of, okay, now I can rest, I have fulfilled my mission. But that never happens. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because life doesn't work that way. Life has no narrative structure. It has no dramatic climax followed by a reassuring resolution. It just goes on and on and on until it doesn't. And Sisyphus knew that better than any of us. Because unlike us, he didn't have the illusion that things would eventually change. He couldn't fool himself into thinking, just one more push and then I can rest. There was no rest. There was no end. The rock would roll down the mountain forever. He knew that with absolute certainty. And yet he kept pushing. At first this seems like masochism. It seems like pathological resignation. Why continue doing something you know is useless? Why not just sit on the ground, refuse to touch the rock and let the gods deal with your disobedience? Why not turn the punishment into a strike, a silent protest against cosmic injustice? But Camus sees something different in Sisyphus, something that most interpretations of the story completely miss. He doesn't see a defeated man. He doesn't see resignation. He sees choice. Because Sisyphus isn't pushing the rock because the gods force him to. In the literal sense, no one is forcing his muscles to move. He's pushing because he has decided to push. And that is an absolutely crucial difference. The gods determined the situation. They placed the rock, the mountain, the condemnation. But what they cannot control, what no external force can control, is Sisyphus' attitude toward it all. They cannot determine what this task means to him. They cannot force him to see it as punishment. They cannot force him to suffer internally as he pushes. And that is where Sisyphus' silent rebellion lies. Not in refusing to push. That would just be another way of letting the gods win. But in transforming the meaning of the act. When Sisyphus fully accepts his condition, when he looks at the rock, at the mountain, at the eternity of repetition ahead of him and decides this is mine, something extraordinary happens. The punishment ceases to be punishment. The punishment loses its power. Because what makes something a punishment is not the action itself, but the internal resistance to it. It is the I don't want to be doing this that turns effort into suffering. But what if you stopped resisting? What if you looked at your rock, at your responsibilities, your routines, your repetitive efforts, everything you have to do every day with no promise that it will lead to a glorious end, and simply accepted it, not with bitter resignation, not with passive surrender, but with an active, conscious, almost celebratory acceptance? What if you said, this is my life, this is my rock, this is my mountain, and I choose to push it, not because I expect it to change, not because I believe there is a reward at the top, but simply because it is what is here to be done. And as long as I am alive, as long as there is strength in my muscles and air in my lungs, I will push, not because you have to push, but because you can. And in that choice, in that tiny monumental decision to continue, to accept, to turn the inevitable into the voluntary, lies a freedom that the gods never imagined you could find. And this is where Camus writes the most disturbing and liberating sentence in all of his philosophy. We must imagine Sisyphus happy, not resigned, not stoic, not numbed by repetition until he feels nothing anymore, but genuinely, deeply happy. And when you read this for the first time, it seems absurd. Literally, how can someone condemned to an eternal and meaningless task be happy? How can there be happiness in pushing a rock that will roll down the mountain forever? This violates everything we have been taught about happiness. It violates the basic logic that happiness comes from achievement, from progress, from getting somewhere. But Camus isn't talking about the happiness you know. He's not talking about euphoria, post-achievement satisfaction, that fleeting feeling that comes when you finally achieve something you've been pursuing. He's talking about something deeper, more stable, more subversive. He's talking about happiness that comes not from the fulfillment of desires, but from the dissolution of the need for fulfillment. When Sisyphus understands, really understands, on a level that transcends the intellectual and reaches the visceral, that there is no alternative, that the stone will roll forever, that there is no escape, no redemption, no happy ending waiting on the horizon, something inside him breaks. But it's not the kind of break that destroys. It's the kind that liberates. Because what breaks is resistance. It is the secret hope that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. It is the fantasy that if he pushes hard enough, fast enough, with enough technique, the rock will stay at the top. That hope, that constant expectation that things should be different than they are, is the real weight he carries. Not the physical rock, but the psychological rock of internal rejection of his reality. And when that hope dies, when Sisyphus finally accepts that this is all there is, that there is no other game but this one, that this is the hand he has been dealt and there is nothing to do but play it, he is liberated. He frees himself from the tyranny of expectation. He frees himself from the constant comparison between how things are and how they should be. He frees himself from the internal judgment that turns every effort into anticipated failure because he already knows it will lead nowhere. And in that liberation, in that radical acceptance of what is, a form of happiness arises that does not depend on anything external. A happiness that needs no justification. A happiness that exists simply because he has decided it can exist. It is not optimism. Optimism would be to believe that things will get better, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that effort will eventually be rewarded. Sisyphus believes none of that. He knows it won't get better. He knows there is no light at the end of the tunnel because there is no end to the tunnel. He knows that his efforts will not be rewarded by any external force. And yet, he finds a way to be happy. Because his happiness does not come from achievement. It comes from the very act of pushing, from the texture of the stone beneath his hands, from the effort of his muscles, from the gradual ascent of the mountain, from the wind that touches his face, from the pure experience of being alive, of doing something, of being present in each moment, without wasting that moment waiting for it to be something else. And there lies the secret that most people never discover. When you stop living for the future, when you stop postponing your existence until something external changes, the present becomes enough. Not because the present is perfect, but because it's all there is. And there is a strange fullness in accepting this, in recognizing that you don't need anything more than what you already have right now to make your life worthwhile. This doesn't mean you stop acting, stop fighting, stop seeking things. Sisyphus doesn't stop pushing, but he pushes differently. He pushes without the anguish of needing a result. He pushes because that's what there is to do. He pushes because he can. And this change in perspective, this subtle transformation in the relationship with the action itself, changes everything. Can you see this in your own life? Can you notice the difference between doing something because you need it to lead somewhere and doing something simply because it is here to be done? Between living waiting for the moment when you can finally relax and living recognizing that there is no definitive moment of relaxation, but that doesn't make the effort any less valid. Most people spend their entire lives in a state of perpetual tension. Tension between where they are and where they think they should be. Tension between what they have and what they think they need to have. Tension between who they are and who they think they should be. And that tension, that constant resistance to reality, is exhausting. It drains all your energy. It turns every day into a battle. And in the end, nothing changes. Because reality remains what it is, no matter how much you resist it. But Sisyphus found a way out of this tension. And the way out was not to change reality. He can't. The rock will keep rolling. The way out was to stop fighting it. It was to say, okay, this is what it is and I choose this. And in that choice, was in that active, not passive acceptance, he regained something that condemnation should have destroyed: his agency, his ability to decide the meaning of things for himself. The gods control the boulder, they control the mountain, they control the external circumstances of his existence, but they don't control what he does with it internally. They don't control whether he suffers or whether he dances. They don't control whether he sees it as punishment or as opportunity. And that's where his quiet victory lies. Because the real punishment would have been to destroy his ability to find meaning. But they didn't succeed, and they won't succeed. What if you applied this to your life right now? What if you looked at all your responsibilities, your routines, your repetitive efforts, everything you do every day that seems to lead nowhere, and decided to simply accept them? Not with resignation, not with giving up, but with the same lucid rebellion as Sisyphus, with the same conscious decision to turn the inevitable into the voluntary. You can't change the fact that you have to work, that you have to deal with people, that you have to face difficulties, that life will continue to throw stones in your path. That's inevitable, but you can completely change the way you relate to all of that. You can stop resisting. You can stop hoping that someday things will be fundamentally different. You can start to inhabit your life as it is, with all its absurdities, its repetitions, its frustration, and still find a way to be joyful in it. Not a naive joy that denies the difficult, but a resilient joy. A joy that exists despite everything. Or rather, a joy that exists because of everything. because it is precisely the fact that nothing has a guaranteed meaning that gives you complete freedom to create the meaning you want. If you've made it this far and this makes sense to you, if something inside you recognizes this truth, even if you don't yet know exactly what to do with it, then there's something you can do right now. Not tomorrow, not when you have more time. Now, subscribe to the channel, because what you're reading isn't cheap motivation that will evaporate in 2 days. It's an awakening. And awakenings take time, repetition, different angles of attack until they finally solidify into something irreversible. And there's much more to come, much more to explore about how to live with awareness, with lucidity, with dignity, even when there's no guarantee that it will bring you what you were promised would be happiness. Turn on notifications, because you will forget, not for lack of will, but because life has a way of pulling you back into autopilot, into habitual resistance, into the frantic search for external meanings that never arrive. And when that happens, it will be important to have something to remind you that there is another way to live, a way you already know, a way Sisyphus knows. And then stay here with me, because there are still layers of this story you haven't seen. There are still implications of this acceptance that need to be unfolded, because accepting the absurd is not a single act, it is a daily practice. It is a constant exercise in remembering that you don't need cosmic justifications to validate your existence. You just need to exist, and choose how to exist, and keep choosing every day, even knowing that the stone will roll again. But here's the part no one tells you. Living this way requires a courage that most people are not willing to have. Because accepting the absurd, living without the promise of a greater purpose, existing without guarantees, that's not instant relief. It's not an epiphany that solves everything at once. It's a constant challenge. It's a daily struggle against all the conditioning that taught you that you need to justify your existence. The whole of society is structured around the idea that you need to be going somewhere. You need to be progressing. You need to be building something. You need to have goals, plans, ambitions. And when you don't, or worse, when you consciously decide to stop pursuing these things as if they were the meaning of your life, the people around you become uncomfortable. They look at you with pity. They ask you if everything is okay. They offer you advice on how to find your purpose, as if you were lost. But you're not lost. You are perhaps for the first time truly found, because you've stopped looking outside yourself for something to tell you who you should be. You've stopped seeking external validation for your existence. You've stopped living as if you were constantly being evaluated by some invisible judge who will ultimately determine whether your life was worthwhile. And that scares people. Because if you can live without those crutches, if you can find peace, or at least dignity, in simply existing without grandiose justifications, it calls into question everything they believe about their own lives. It exposes the fact that perhaps they are chasing ghosts. That maybe all the narratives they've constructed to give meaning to their existence are just stories they tell themselves because they can't bear the alternative. And maybe they are. But that doesn't make their lives any less valid. That's an important part of what Camus is saying. He's not judging those who choose escape. He's not saying that these people are weak or deluded. He's just saying that there is another option. A more difficult, more lonely option, but perhaps a more honest one. And that if you can live that way, you will discover a freedom that no external narrative can give you. Because when you no longer need a transcendental purpose, when you no longer need your life to fit into some grand cosmic scheme, you become impervious to certain forms of suffering. You stop feeling guilty for not doing enough. Because enough in relation to what? Enough for whom? You stop feeling that you are late, that you are wasting time, that you should be somewhere else. Because there is no right place to be. You are where you are. And that's all. This does not mean that you stop acting, stop growing, stop seeking experiences. Sisyphus doesn't stop pushing the rock, but he pushes without the anxiety of needing results, without the pressure that he needs to achieve something specific for his life to be valid. And there is an extraordinary lightness in that, a freedom of movement that you don't have when you are carrying the weight of all the expectations that you and others have placed on you. Nietzsche spoke about this in another way. He said that human beings need to constantly surpass themselves, need to become the Übermensch, the Superman who transcends the limitations of common morality and creates his own values. And there is power in that. There is a vision of greatness, of unlimited potential, but there is also exhaustion, because Nietzsche demands that you be extraordinary. He demands that you surpass yourself, that you always be more than you are. And that can be inspiring, but it can also be overwhelming. Camus offers something different, something more accessible. He doesn't demand that you become a Superman. He doesn't demand that you transcend your humanity. He just asks that you accept it, that you accept your limitations, your repetitions, your finitude, and that you live fully within those limitations, without pretending they don't exist, but also without letting them crush you. Because the truth is, you're not going to completely surpass yourself. You will not transcend the human condition. You will continue to be exactly what you are, a finite, mortal, limited being, thrown into a universe that does not care about your existence. And you can spend your whole life fighting against it, trying to prove that you are more than that, trying to leave a permanent mark that justifies your passage on Earth. Or you can just accept it and live. And living, in this context, doesn't just mean surviving. It doesn't just mean fulfilling obligations, paying bills, passing the time. Living means being present. It means feeling things completely. It means allowing the experience of being alive, with all its complexity, its pain, its beauty, its absurdity, to be enough. Not because it's perfect, but because it's all there is. Sartre, Camus' contemporary and sometimes intellectual rival, said that we are condemned to freedom, that there is no predetermined human essence, that we are obliged to create our own meaning, and that this obligation is heavy. And he is right. Freedom weighs heavily. The responsibility of having to decide who you are without any reliable external guide is terrifying. But Camus adds something crucial to this. You don't have to create grand meaning. You don't need your life to tell an epic story. You don't need every choice you make to be laden with cosmic importance. You can simply live. And there is a profound dignity in that. A dignity that does not depend on achievements, recognition, or leaving a legacy. Dignity lies in the very act of continuing, in the act of looking at the absurd and deciding that you will continue pushing your rock, not because you expect it to change, not because you believe there is a hidden meaning you have not yet discovered, but simply because you are alive. And as long as you are alive, you will act, you will feel, you will experience, you will push. And that is the true generosity toward the future that Camus mentions, giving everything to the present, not saving your life for some future moment that may never come. Not postponing your happiness until conditions are perfect. Not waiting until you finally achieve that goal that will justify all your efforts, but living now, intensely, completely, without reservation. Because the present is all you have, the future is an abstraction, the past is a memory, but now this exact moment is real, and you can waste it waiting for it to be something else, or you can inhabit it fully with all its imperfections, its absurdities, its frustrations. And when you do that, when you truly live in the present, without the constant shadow of future expectations hanging over you, something changes. Not externally. The world remains the same. Your circumstances remain the same. The stone continues to roll down the mountain. But internally, there is a transformation. A peace that does not depend on anything external. A joy that needs no justification. It is not the happiness you were promised. It is not the fulfillment of dreams. It's not the happy ending. It's something more subtle, more profound. It's the feeling of being aligned with reality, of no longer fighting against it, of having made peace with the fact that life does not have a predetermined script, and that this is not a tragedy. It's just the truth. And the truth, when you finally stop running away from it, has a strange way of setting you free. But there is something that needs to be said with brutal honesty. This lucidity comes at a price, and the price is the loneliness of seeing what others do not see. It is waking up in a world where most people are still asleep, not in the arrogant sense of intellectual superiority, but in the literal sense that they still believe in narratives that you can no longer swallow. And there is no going back. There is no way to unlive what you have lived. There is no way to unsee what you have seen. When you truly understand the absurdity, when you accept that there is no transcendental meaning, that there is no cosmic purpose, that everything is fundamentally contingent and could be otherwise for no particular reason, you lose something. You lose the comfort of easy certainties. You lose the ability to take refuge in ready-made explanations. You lose the possibility of naively believing that there is a greater plan, that everything happens for a reason, that your sufferings have a hidden purpose that will be revealed at the right time. And the loss of these illusions hurts, because they were useful. They made life more bearable. They provided a roadmap when you didn't know what to do. They offered comfort when everything seemed meaningless. And now you no longer have access to them. Not because you consciously chose to let them go, although on some level you did, but because once you see the truth, you can no longer pretend you didn't. And the people around you continue to live as if these narratives were real. They continue to make long-term plans as if the future were predictable. They continue to pursue goals as if achieving them would bring the ultimate satisfaction they are seeking. They continue to sacrifice today in the name of a glorious tomorrow that never comes. And you watch all this with a mixture of compassion and melancholy, because you know they are chasing ghosts. And you can't tell them that without sounding cynical, without sounding defeatist, without sounding like you've given up on life. But you haven't given up. You've just woken up. And waking up in this context is not liberating in the way that self-help books promise. It does not come with a feeling of euphoria, crystal clarity, or instant peace. It comes with a kind of weight. The weight of having to live with your eyes open in a world that prefers to keep them closed. And here's the hardest part. You can't easily share this. Because when you try to explain it, when you try to articulate this perception that maybe life doesn't have the meaning we were taught to seek, people interpret it as nihilism, as depression, as if you were giving up on everything, as if nothing mattered, as if you were preaching a form of existential apathy. But that's not it. It's not even close. You're not saying that nothing matters. You're saying that things matter, but not in the way we were taught. That meaning doesn't come from outside. Now, it doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from history. It doesn't come from some cosmic structure that validates your efforts. Meaning comes from you, from your choice to continue, from your decision to push the rock not because it will stay on top, but because as long as you're alive, there's a rock to push. And that's too subtle a distinction for most conversations. So you learn to be quiet. You learn not to mention certain things. You learn to let people believe what they need to believe, because you understand, perhaps for the first time, that not everyone is ready to look into the abyss, and that forcing them to look would be cruel. But this creates a distance between you and the people you love. Not a physical distance, but an existential one. You are living in a world slightly different from theirs, a world where guarantees don't exist, where the future is not promised, where effort is not rewarded by any external force. And they are living in a world where there is still hope that eventually everything will fall into place, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that it is worth sacrificing the present for a better future. And you can't blame them for that, because you've lived in that world too. And you know how comforting it is, you know how much easier it is to believe that there is meaning than to accept that you need to create your own. You know how much less terrifying it is to think that there is a right path than to accept that all paths are equally arbitrary and that you simply need to choose one and walk it. But you also know, and this is the part that hurts, that you can't go back. You can't unlearn what you've learned. You can't close your eyes again after you've opened them. And that means you have to find a way to live with that clarity. You have to learn to carry that knowledge without letting it crush you. And Sisyphus teaches you something about that. Because Sisyphus is completely alone. The gods punished him and left him there on the mountain with his rock. There is no one to share the burden. There is no one to validate his efforts. There is no audience, no witnesses, no recognition. It's just him, the rock, and the mountain. And he needs to find a way to continue despite or because of this absolute loneliness. And what he discovers is something you also need to discover. Dignity does not come from being recognized. It does not come from having someone tell you that you are doing the right thing. It does not come from external validation. Dignity comes from continuing even when no one is watching, even when no one cares, even when you know that in the grand scheme of things, nothing you do will significantly alter the universe. Dignity comes from pushing the rock because it is your rock. Because as long as you are alive, you have a choice. And the choice is not between pushing or not pushing. Circumstances usually determine that. The choice is between pushing with bitter resignation, feeling like a victim of circumstance, or pushing with lucid acceptance, knowing that this is simply what there is to do and that you will do it with everything you have. And that choice, that tiny decision about how you relate to your own life, is where your freedom lies. It is the only freedom that no one can take away from you. Because the gods can control the rock, they can control the mountain, they can control external circumstances, but they cannot control your internal attitude. They cannot force you to suffer. They cannot force you to feel defeated. And if they can't, if even the gods can't determine how you experience your own life, then no one can. No circumstance, no matter how difficult, can completely destroy your ability to choose how you respond to it. That is the last stronghold of human freedom, and it is unshakable. But, and this is an important but, it requires you to take full responsibility. Because if you have that freedom, if you have that ability to choose your attitude, regardless of circumstances, then you can no longer blame anything or anyone else for the way you live. You can no longer say, it's society's fault, it's my parents' fault, it's the system's fault. It may even be true that all these things have influenced your situation, but how you respond to it, that is entirely up to you. And that absolute responsibility is terrifying, because it's much easier to be a victim of circumstances. It's much more comfortable to believe that if your life isn't what you wanted, it's because external forces prevented you. Because then you don't have to change anything about yourself. You don't have to bear the weight of your own choices. But Sisyphus doesn't have that luxury. He can't blame the gods. Obviously, they are responsible for putting him there. But blaming them doesn't change anything. The rock keeps rolling. The mountain is still there. And he still has to push. So he does the only thing he can do. He takes complete ownership of his situation. Not in the sense of liking it or pretending it isn't unfair, but in the sense of recognizing that this is reality and that complaining about it does not change it. And there is extraordinary strength in that. Strength that comes not from ignoring the difficulty, but from looking at it directly and deciding that it will not break you, that you will continue, that you will push your rock with everything you have, not because you expect a reward, not because you believe there is some hidden meaning, but simply because you can, because you are alive. And as long as you are alive, you will act. And maybe, just maybe, that is the only form of real victory available to us. Not a victory over circumstances, not a victory that fundamentally changes the world, but a victory over the need for victory. A peace that does not depend on conquest, a joy that needs no justification. Sisyphus pushes the rock rolls away. He climbs down, he picks up the rock again, and he starts over. And somewhere in that endless cycle he found something the gods never imagined he could find. Not hope. Hope would be illusory, but something better, something more solid. He found himself, and he discovered that was enough. And this is where Camus' philosophy reveals its deepest beauty. Because after all, after accepting the absurd, after abandoning illusions of transcendental meaning, after taking full responsibility for one's own existence, there is no despair. There is something unexpected, something that Camus captured in one of the most powerful phrases he ever wrote. In the midst of winter, I discovered within myself an invincible summer. An invincible summer. Not naive optimism, not denial of pain, not the pretense that everything will be fine, but an inner strength, a vitality, an ability to continue existing with intensity, even when everything around you suggests that you should give up. And that strength does not come from outside. It does not come from any external promise, any divine guarantee, any comforting narrative. It comes from within, from the simple fact of being alive, from having blood circulating in your veins, from having air entering your lungs, from having consciousness operating behind your eyes. And when you no longer need external justifications, when you no longer need the universe to validate your existence, something extraordinary happens. You begin to notice things that previously went unnoticed. The texture of the world, the small experiences that make up each day, the taste of coffee, the weight of your body when you wake up, the sound of rain, the way the light changes throughout the hours, mundane things, things that have always been there but that you never really inhabited because you were too busy chasing something bigger, something more important, something that would finally give meaning to everything. But when you stop chasing, when you finally accept that there is nothing to achieve beyond what is already here, these small experiences become enough. Not because they are perfect, but because they are real, because they are all there is. And there is a strange fulfillment in recognizing this, in stopping wasting the present, hoping it will be something else. This doesn't mean that the pain disappears. It doesn't mean that problems are magically solved. Sisyphus still has to push the rock. The rock still rolls down the mountain. The effort is still real. The fatigue is still real. The frustration is still real. But the way he relates to all of this has fundamentally changed. He is no longer at war with his reality. He is no longer resisting what is. He has accepted it. And in acceptance, he has found a form of peace that does not depend on anything external. And you can find that too. Not overnight. Not through a sudden revelation that solves everything. But gradually, through the daily practice of remembering that you don't need anything more than what you already have to make your life worthwhile. That you don't need to achieve anything great. That you don't need to leave a legacy. That you don't need to be recognized. That simply being here, living, feeling, experiencing, that is enough. And when you truly embody this, when it ceases to be just an intellectual idea and becomes something visceral, something you feel in your bones, you become free in a way that cannot be adequately described in words. Free from the constant anxiety of not doing enough. Free from the guilt of not living up to some impossible standard. Free from the incessant comparison between your life and the lives of others. Free from the need to justify your existence to anyone, including yourself. Because the most liberating and most frightening truth is this: you don't need a reason to exist. You simply exist. And as long as you exist, you can choose how to inhabit that existence. You can choose to push your rock with resignation or with joy. You can choose to see your life as a sentence or as an opportunity. You can choose to resist the absurd or dance with it. And Sisyphus chose to dance. Not literally, he is pushing a rock up a mountain after all, but metaphorically, spiritually. He turned his sentence into an art form. He turned the inevitable repetition into a conscious ritual. He turned the weight of the rock into a constant reminder that he is alive, that he still has strength, that he can still act. And if he can do that, If he can find happiness in a situation that was specifically designed to be the greatest punishment possible, then so can you. Because your circumstances are probably not as extreme as his. You are not literally condemned to the same task forever. You have variations, you have choices, you have possibilities that Sisyphus does not have. But maybe you don't need more possibilities. Maybe you just need to inhabit the ones you already have. Maybe you need to stop hoping your life will be different than it is and start living the life you have. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. And because as long as you're alive, you can do something with it. And what you do doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to change the world. It doesn't have to leave a permanent mark on history. It can simply be living. Live intensely. Live with presence. Live with the awareness that each moment is unique and unrepeatable, and that wasting it waiting for a better moment is the real tragedy. Because in the end, and this is the truth that Sisyphus knows and that you may be beginning to know as well, the question was never whether life has meaning. The question has always been, are you going to live anyway? Will you push your rock even though you know it will roll back? Will you continue even without guarantees? Will you exist fully even though you know that everything is temporary and that in the end nothing remains? And if your answer is yes, if you decide that yes, you will continue, you will live, you will push your rock not because you expect a reward but simply because you can, then you understand. You have grasped the essence of what Camus was trying to say. You have become in a sense Sisyphus. And like Sisyphus, you can be happy, not in spite of the absurdity, but within it, with it, through it. Because happiness is not where you were told it was. It is not in the achievement of goals. It is not in the fulfillment of dreams. It is not at some point in the future when everything finally falls into place. Happiness, if there is such a thing, is here, now, in the texture of the present moment, in the simple fact of being alive, in the ability to feel, to think, to choose. And maybe that's all there is. Maybe it doesn't need to be more than that. Sisyphus pushes his rock, and at some point during the climb, he stops for a moment and looks around. He sees the mountain. He feels the weight of the rock. He feels the fatigue in his muscles, and he smiles. Not because he is happy that the rock will stay at the top and he knows it won't, but because this moment, this exact moment of effort, of presence, of life happening, is enough. And then he keeps pushing. So I ask you now in all honesty, are you Sisyphus waiting for the rock to stop rolling? Or are you Sisyphus who has already accepted that it won't stop and decided to push anyway? Tell me here in the comments, what is your rock and how are you choosing to push it? Because this conversation, this reflection on the absurd, on freedom, on the courage to exist without guarantees, doesn't end here. There is much more to explore. There are many more layers of this truth to unfold. And if you've made it this far, if something inside you has recognized this truth, even if you don't yet know exactly what to do with it, then stay with me. Watch the next videos on the channel. Count on me and follow the white rabbit.